Today's a big day.
I know. This will be the last official podcast for the Stratoballoon project.
I think I feel its here coming.
That's just dinner talking.
Hey!
The rigging ended up taking a lot longer than we first thought to piece together. We used ideas from a couple of different sources, as well as some of our own ingenuity to come up with the final solution.
Here is the complete balloon stack, just prior to release. We're going to describe how everything was attached, from the capsule up.
Before we get to that, there are a couple of preliminary points we'd like to make.
First, we had a piece of tubing connected to the regulator on the helium tank, and I'd like to show how we kept the balloon attached to that tube while it was being filled. The balloon had a 3-centimeter neck, but we had problems finding fittings for our regulator that would allow us to use a 3-centimeter hose. As a result, we had a lot of slack to take up. Hair scrunchies to the rescue! Despite their look, the scrunchies had no sharp points. That was a must. Any sharp edge could have punctured the balloon, ending our project before it even got off the ground.
Oh, ha ha ha.
Sorry. Well, okay, no I'm not. Anyway, I was worried the entire time we were filling the balloon that simply doubling the neck of the balloon over was just going to lead to a lot of lost helium. But it worked out remarkably well.
Dad and both of my grandpas took turns holding the balloon while it was inflating. When it looked close to being ready, we attached a line leading to a jug with 5.5 pounds of water in it, weighed out the night before. 5.5 pounds represented our payload plus 50%. Once the balloon could lift that jug easily, we knew it had enough helium in it to lift our capsule.
The final note, before we get to the balloon stack itself, is the type of line we used. FAA regulations require a 50-pound line at most. One of the launches we studied recommended Everbuilt Mason Twine number 18, a 40-pound line. I think we bought a 25-foot roll and ended up using every inch.
So, on to the balloon stack. Starting with the capsule. I'd like to revisit the tubes that we attached to the bottom and the top of the capsule. Those tubes served two main purposes. The first was to give us an easy way to seal the capsule. We cut them long enough so that they would extend out past the edges of the capsule. That allowed us to hold them in place with thick rubber bands.
The second purpose of the tubes was to provide a channel where the lines that would attach the capsule to the rest of the stack would run. We ran a line of mason twine through each of the bottom tubes. Those tubes had a small hole drilled into the top, and the twine was fed up through each. Next, we tied large nylon washers to each end of the lines. That was designed to prevent the lines from shifting back and forth once the capsule was in flight.
Those lines were fed up through holes drilled into the ends of the top tubes. The top tubes were there to keep the lines running vertically, which meant the capsule wouldn't flip around in flight.
And because the line was run down one side, through the bottom tubes, and up the other, the bottom tubes bore all of the weight of the capsule.
Next up the stack was the radar reflector. I built this using an Instructables project titled Lightweight Radar Reflector. We'll put a direct link in the podcast notes. The reflector was really 3 folders covered in aluminum tape. The trick was how to attach it to the lines.
We had a piece of tubing left over from the capsule. I drilled a couple of holes in it and then punched matching holes in the top of the reflector. I tied the reflector on and then duct taped over the string to make sure they wouldn't go anywhere. Next, we passed the lines from the capsule up through the holes drilled into the ends of this tube. Like with the capsule, we added washers here to prevent the cables from sliding around too much. 4 of the lines shown here are from the capsule, and the 5th is the line leading up to the balloon. These 5 lines were tied off at the point where the parachute's lines come together. We duct taped this bundle to make sure the knot wouldn't slip loose.
Moving up the stack, we come to the parachute. We wanted the parachute to go up pre-deployed, which meant finding a way for it to stay open on the ride up and not get tangled up in the capsule. The parachute we bought from Ericon had a good-sized hole at the apex, but nothing we could really tie onto. Mom came up with the idea of passing the line that would attach to the balloon down through that hole and tying it onto the loop where the parachute lines come together. With everything else in the stack also tied to this point, the balloon line would bear all of the weight for the ascent, which is what we wanted.
The really clever part of this was how to keep the parachute from slipping down and covering the top of the radar reflector and capsule. She sewed the parachute to the balloon line at the hole at the apex, but intentionally made the line shorter than the parachute leads. We did that to ensure that the balloon line was the weight-bearing element here. The thread she used to sew the parachute to the line would be strong enough to hold the parachute itself, but we didn't trust it to be able to hold up the weight of the capsule, the radar reflector, and everything else below it in the stack. That was the job of the balloon line.
This arrangement meant that when the balloon popped, the balloon line and the balloon shreds would fall down over the top of the parachute, but the parachute itself would stay open.
Only later did I find other parachutes that actually had a ring at the top where you could attach a line. With one of those, we would have tied the balloon to the top of the parachute and everything else to the bottom of the parachute. We wouldn't have had to run the line all the way down. The final piece to this puzzle was how to attach the balloon itself. I fretted over that for a long time.
You might say that this problem had him in knots.
Okay, alright, I admit it, that was a good one. Yes, it had me in knots. In fact, when I ordered the balloon from Kmart, I specifically asked him if the balloon came with any mounting hardware, or if it was just the balloon itself. He explained that no, it was just the balloon, and he said to attach it to the line, what I would do is double the neck over a couple of times, and then put duct tape or electrical tape around the knot to make sure it stays in place. I don't remember what I was researching, but I happened across a highaltitudescience.com page that showed in great detail how to tie the balloon off using a couple of rubber bands, a loop of twine, and some tape. We'll post a link to this in the podcast notes, but this was basically the procedure we used to tie the balloon off for our project.
Following that blog post, we were able to securely attach our loop of mason twine. Dad then tied the balloon line to the loop, and we taped the entire thing again.
And there it is, the entire stack.
So that's it, huh?
Yep.
There's really no more to tell?
No, I don't think so.
Really? No final puns at all? You gotta have something lined up. Nothing about stringing this last balloon podcast out? What about trying to get a final one-liner off the ground?
Actually, I avoided ones like that precisely because they were too easy.
You might be right. So we'll just tie this podcast up, put a bow on it, and call it good?
See, now that's my daughter.